I was standing near the edge of the ballroom when my sister decided to turn me into a joke. Not quietly, not in a corner, right there under the chandeliers with a microphone in her hand and 200 people looking at her like she was the sun. Madison had always loved an audience. Her wedding was exactly what you'd expect white roses everywhere, a string quartet. Nobody was really listening to, and enough champagne to make people feel generous with their opinions. I wasn't part of the bridal party. I never was. I was just there in a simple navy dress, holding a glass of water because I had a long drive back to base the next morning. I stayed near the wall on purpose. Old habit. You learn that skill when you grow up in a family where being useful matters more than being seen. Madison laughed into the mic, waiting for the room to settle. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she said. "Especially my big sister Avery. She managed to get leave from her paperwork job in the Navy." A few people chuckled. Polite ones, the kind who laugh because everyone else is. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't move. I'd heard worse. For years, my job in the Navy had been reduced to jokes about spreadsheets and emails, even though the people making those jokes wouldn't last a week doing what I actually did. Madison wasn't done. She's always been the serious one, she continued smiling wide. No time for weddings, kids, or real life. But hey, someone has to keep the forms in order, right? More laughter, louder this time. I took a slow breath and stared at the condensation sliding down my glass. This was supposed to be her day. I told myself I could let it go. I always did. Then my father stepped up. Thomas Collins. Tall, confident, already on his second drink. He put a hand on Madison's shoulder, like he was sealing a deal. "And speaking of family," he said, clearing his throat, "we wanted to do something special for Madison and her new husband. Something meaningful." The room leaned in. Phones came up. This was clearly planned. My stomach dropped before he even finished the sentence. "Avery has been lucky enough to buy a beautiful house near her base," he said, "and we thought what better way to start married life than giving that house to the happy couple." For half a second, nobody spoke. Then the room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Someone actually said, "Wow." I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I didn't breathe. That house wasn't a family asset. It wasn't an investment. It was mine. Bought with years of Navy pay, missed holidays, and weekends spent asleep instead of social. It was the one thing I owned outright, no strings attached. My father looked at me from across the room, eyebrows raised, daring me to play along. Madison turned eyes wide in fake surprise. "Wait, are you serious?" she said into the mic. Then she looked straight at me and grinned. "Oh my God, Avery, that's so generous." That was the moment. I could feel it in my chest, that familiar pressure telling me to stay quiet. Don't ruin it. Don't make a scene. Don't embarrass the family. I set my glass down on a passing tray and took one step forward. "No," I said. Not loud, not angry, just clear. The music stopped. I didn't even know there was music playing until it cut off. My father's smile froze. Madison laughed once sharp and confused. What she said. "No," I repeated. "That's not happening." You could feel the shift in the room, the kind where people suddenly realize they're watching something they didn't sign up for. Madison walked toward me, fast heels clicking hard against the floor. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed, just loud enough for the front tables to hear. "Do you have any idea what you're doing right now? I'm correcting you," I said. "That's my house." Her face changed. Not sad, not hurt. Angry. "You always do this," she snapped. "You always have to make things awkward." "I didn't make this awkward," I said. "You did." She stepped closer, too close. I could smell champagne on her breath. "You could have just said yes," she said, for once. I didn't step back. No. That's when she shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push. She used both hands hard enough that my back hit the wall behind me. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs, sharp and fast. People gasped. Someone screamed my sister's name. Before I could straighten up, my father was there. He grabbed my arm, yanking me forward. "Don't do this," he growled. "Not here." "Let go of me," I said. He didn't. He pushed me again, harder this time. My shoulder slammed into the wall, and my head followed. The sound was dull and heavy, like something breaking that shouldn't. Stars burst in my vision. I tasted metal. The room exploded into noise. Chairs scraping. Someone yelling to call 911. Madison stood frozen, hands over her mouth, eyes darting not to me but to the crowd. I slid a few inches down the wall and caught myself, one hand pressed flat against the stone. When I pulled it away, my fingers were red. That's when I saw it. A phone held up near the bar. Steady? Too steady. In the corner of the screen, a small red dot glowed. Live. If this moment pulled you in, take a second to leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if stories like this matter to you, make sure to subscribe. It helps more than you think. I didn't know who was streaming or how many people were watching. I just knew the room felt different, quieter, sharper. Sirens wailed somewhere outside, getting closer. My father finally let go of my arm. He looked around, breathing hard, like he was trying to figure out how this had gone so wrong so fast. Madison whispered, "Dad, like that might fix it." I stayed where I was, back against the wall, blood warm against my skin, listening to the sound of phones recording something none of us could take back. The sirens kept getting louder, and with every step the paramedics took toward me, I felt my body doing the opposite of what my brain wanted. I pressed my shoulder harder into the wall, more out of instinct than strength. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to lie down. I didn't want anyone in my family touching me again. A woman I didn't know handed me a napkin. White linen. It soaked through almost immediately. Someone else kept saying my name like we were friends. Madison stood a few feet away, frozen, her dress still perfect. My father had already stepped back into concerned parent mode, one hand raised, voice lowered, trying to calm the room. I stared at the floor and focused on one thing, staying upright. That instinct didn't come from the wedding. It came from years earlier. In our house growing up, attention worked like a spotlight. It followed Madison everywhere. Dance recitals, birthdays, school plays. Even her bad moods had gravity. If she was upset, dinner changed. If she was happy, the house breathed easier. I learned early that the safest place was just outside the light. Madison was loud, confident. She knew how to perform. She cried on cue and smiled when it mattered. Teachers loved her. Neighbors remembered her name. I was the one who remembered schedules, who fixed things when they broke, who learned quickly that being useful was the fastest way to stay out of trouble. My parents never said they favored her. They didn't have to. It showed up in small decisions that stacked over time. If Madison wanted something, the answer was, "We'll see." If I wanted something, the answer was, "Do you really need that?" When I was 16, I got a part-time job after school. Madison didn't. My father said she needed time to focus on her future. I needed to learn responsibility. At 18, Madison got help with tuition for a private college across the state. When I mentioned applying somewhere, my mother smiled and said, "You're so independent. You'll figure it out." I did. I learned to pay attention to what wasn't said. Praise came easily to Madison. Silence followed me around like a shadow. At family gatherings, relatives would ask Madison about her plans, her dreams, her relationships. When they turned to me, it was always the same question. "So you're doing okay?" I always said yes. Not because it was always true, but because it was easier. The unspoken rule was simple. Madison mattered emotionally. I mattered functionally. That rule hardened when I told them I was joining the Navy. My father didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just looked at me like I'd chosen the wrong line at the grocery store. "You're sure?" he asked. "That's a lot for a woman." "I'm sure," I said. My mother tried a softer approach. "It's such a rigid life," she said. "You've always been so serious. I just don't want you to miss out." What she meant was clear. Madison's life was something to admire. Mine was something to worry about. When I left for training, Madison threw me a small goodbye dinner. She made jokes about uniforms and haircuts. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. It was expected. I learned very quickly that the Navy didn't care about family roles. It cared about results. If you showed up late, there were consequences. If you did your job well, it showed. No one clapped. No one needed to. Things worked or they didn't. That structure made sense to me. Back home, Madison's life kept moving in ways that looked impressive from the outside. New friends, new jobs, new relationships. Each update came with photos and stories my parents repeated like highlights. Mine came in emails I didn't send. I didn't talk much about deployments or long hours, not because they were secret, but because I'd learned those details didn't land anywhere. When I bought the house near my base, I didn't announce it. I just mentioned it in passing on a phone call. "That's nice," my mother said. "So you won't be lonely." She didn't ask where it was, or how long I'd saved, or how it felt to sign something with only my name on it. Madison found out later. She came to visit once, walking through the rooms like she was evaluating a rental. "It's kind of big for one person," she said. "But good for you." I took that as praise. Over time, the tone changed. What started as comments turned into assumptions. "Maybe we'll do holidays at your place," my father said once. Not asking. "You don't really need a house that size forever," Madison added another time. Laughing, always laughing. I pushed back quietly. I said things like, "It works for me, and I'm not planning on selling." No one argued. They just stopped listening. That's the thing about families like mine. They don't fight your boundaries. They wait you out. Standing in that ballroom, blood soaking through a napkin, I realized the wedding wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. They didn't think I'd say no. They'd trained me not to. The paramedic finally convinced me to sit. As he checked my head, he asked what happened. "My sister shoved me," I said. He looked past me at my father. "And him." Yes. No hesitation. No qualifiers. My father opened his mouth probably to explain, to soften it, to reframe it as stress or emotion or family business. I didn't look at him. I looked at Madison instead. She was crying now, real tears this time, not for me, for the room, for the photos, for the story slipping out of her control. That was when it hit me, even through the pain and the noise and the flashing lights. They weren't shocked that I'd been hurt. They were shocked that I hadn't stayed quiet. The ambulance doors closed with a solid thump, and the noise from the ballroom dropped away like someone had turned down the world. I stared at the ceiling lights as the vehicle started moving, counting the panels without really seeing them. My head hurt, but it was a familiar kind of focus taking over. The kind that shows up when things go sideways and you still have to function. In the Navy, you learn early that panic wastes time. You deal with what's in front of you in the order it needs to be handled. That mindset didn't come naturally to me. I earned it. I joined the Navy because I wanted a place where effort meant something measurable, where rules were written down, where expectations didn't change depending on who your parents liked more. At boot camp, nobody cared that I was quiet. They cared whether I showed up on time, carried my weight, and did the job without excuses. When I messed up, I was corrected. When I got it right, the work moved forward. No applause, no resentment, just results. That made sense. My job was logistics and operation support. Not glamorous, no movie scenes. But when supply chains fail, missions stall. When timelines slip, people get hurt. My work lived in the background, which suited me just fine. I learned how to plan under pressure, how to spot problems before they became emergencies, how to keep my voice calm even when everything else wasn't. Those skills don't show up well in family conversations. When I visited home on leave, people asked if I was still doing that Navy thing. Madison would roll her eyes and joke about paperwork and meetings. My father liked to say, "She's very organized," like it was a personality quirk, not a professional requirement. I stopped correcting them. Explaining never changed anything. Back in uniform, it was different. If I flagged an issue and it saved time or resources, it mattered. If I stayed late to make sure a deployment ran clean, someone noticed. Promotions didn't come with speeches. They came with more responsibility. That was fine with me. The night before the wedding, I'd driven in from base after a full day. I parked outside the hotel and sat in the car for a minute, hands on the steering wheel debating whether I should even go inside. I went anyway. Not for Madison, for the version of myself that had spent years keeping the peace. In the ambulance, the medic asked what I did for work. I told him I was in the Navy. He nodded, like that explained something. It did. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Scans, questions, bright lights, a doctor explaining I was lucky. No serious damage. A concussion, bruising. I listened, answered when asked, and kept my hands still. My phone buzzed on the metal tray beside the bed. I didn't look at it right away. When I finally did, the screen was full of notifications. Missed calls, messages, numbers I didn't recognize. A text from someone on base. You okay? Just saw the video? Video! I opened one link, then another. The angle was bad, shaky, but clear enough. You could hear my father's voice. You could see Madison's hands. You could see me say no, and you could see what happened after. I closed the phone and set it face down. This wasn't about embarrassment. It wasn't even about the pain anymore. It was about something much simpler. They'd never expected witnesses. In the Navy, accountability is part of the job. If something goes wrong, there's a process. Statements, reviews, evidence. It's not personal. It's procedural. Family didn't work like that. Family relied on memory, on tone, on who told the story first. This time, the story was already out there. A nurse came in to check my vitals. She glanced at my phone, then at my face. Rough night, she said. I've had worse, I replied. That was true. Just not like this. By morning, the hospital hallway was quiet. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving that hollow, steady feeling I recognized from long operations. The kind where you don't know what comes next, but you know you'll deal with it. I checked my messages again. There were voicemails from my mother. Long ones, emotional, asking me to call her back, telling me everyone was upset, saying we needed to talk. There was one from my father, short, controlled. We need to clear some things up. I didn't respond. On base, silence is sometimes the smartest move. You gather facts. You document. You don't react. I wasn't angry, not the way people expect. Anger burns fast. This felt colder, cleaner. I thought about the house, the one thing I'd built without anyone's help. Close enough to base that I could get home after late shifts. Quiet. Predictable. Mine. That house wasn't just a building. It was proof that I could create something stable without permission. The doctor came back with discharge papers and instructions. No driving for a bit. Rest. Follow up. He asked if I had someone to pick me up. I do, I said. And I did. A friend from base pulled up outside uniform, still on coffee in hand. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and handed me the cup like it was routine. As we drove, my phone buzzed again. New messages, more links, the view count climbing. I didn't watch them. I watched the road instead and made a quiet decision, the same way I made most decisions that mattered. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to apologize, and I wasn't going to let anyone else decide what belonged to me. The front door unlocked with the same solid click it always did, and the sound grounded me more than the pain medication ever could. I stepped inside my house slowly, careful with my shoulder, letting the door close behind me. The place smelled the way it always did, clean faintly like detergent, and the lemon cleaner I used on the counters. Quiet, predictable. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a moment, hands still on the handle, listening. No voices, no phones ringing, no one asking me to explain myself. This was why I'd bought it. I'd found the house 3 years earlier, not because it was charming or impressive, but because it made sense. Close to base. Solid structure. Nothing fancy. I didn't want a starter home. I wanted something that didn't require permission. I signed the papers alone, paid the down payment alone. The mortgage came straight out of my account every month like clockwork. No co-signers, no family money, no favors. When I first told my parents, my mother had said, "That's a lot of responsibility." What she meant was, "Why would you do this without us?" At the time, it hadn't bothered me. I was used to that tone. Mild concern wrapped around disbelief. Madison's reaction had been different. She came to see the house a few weeks later, walking through the rooms with her hands on her hips. "It's nice," she said, dragging out the word. "Very you." I'd taken that as neutral, but that visit was the first shift. After that, the comments changed. "Must be nice having all that space," she said once over the phone. "Your place would be perfect for hosting," my mother added another time like it was a suggestion. Then came the jokes. "You don't even use half your house." Madison laughed at a family dinner. "It's just sitting there." I didn't argue. I corrected the facts when needed and moved on. That was my pattern. State the reality. Don't defend it. The problem with silence is that some people hear it as agreement. The first time I realized they thought the house wasn't really mine was subtle. My father mentioned casually that Madison and her fiancé were looking at places. "Prices are crazy," he said. "Hard to get started these days." I nodded. "Yeah." He waited. I didn't fill the space. "Well," he added, "you're not using yours the way a family would." That was the word. Family. It came up more and more after that. Family home, family asset, family future. Nobody ever asked me if I planned to move, or if I wanted roommates, or if I was happy there. They talked around me, not to me. The wedding sped everything up. Once a date was set, the conversations shifted from hypothetical to assumed. Madison stopped hinting. She started planning. She asked about repainting, about furniture, about making it feel more like them. I laughed it off the first time. "You're not moving into my house," I said, like it was obviously a joke. She smiled back. "We'll see." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. I was wrong. Sitting in my living room, now ice pack on my shoulder phone, face down on the coffee table, the pieces lined up too cleanly to ignore. The wedding wasn't about celebration. It was leverage. They didn't want to negotiate. They wanted to corner me. My phone buzzed again. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they'd be. Madison would be upset. My mother would be worried. My father would be calm and disappointed. They would all agree on one thing. I had embarrassed them. Not hurt them, not frightened them. Embarrassed them. That was the real crime. I stood and walked through the house slower than usual, checking doors and windows like I always did when I came back from a long stretch away. Habit from deployments. Make sure everything is where you left it. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, everything exactly as it should be. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where I kept my important documents. Deed, mortgage paperwork, insurance, all in my name, clean, boring, real. No matter how loud the room at the wedding had been, this was louder in its own way. Facts don't need applause. I thought about Madison standing there in her white dress, hands raised, like she couldn't believe I'd forced her into that position, as if I'd made her shove me, as if saying no had been an attack. That entitlement hadn't come from nowhere. It had been taught, reinforced, protected. For years, my family had operated under a quiet rule. What benefited Madison was good for everyone. My house had crossed from nice achievement to resource without my consent. They didn't see theft. They saw redistribution. In their minds, I wasn't losing anything. I was giving something back. That logic only works if you never believed the thing belonged to me in the first place. I sat down at the kitchen table and finally turned my phone over. Messages filled the screen. Most of them I ignored. One caught my attention. A text from Madison sent earlier that morning. "You didn't have to make me look like a monster." I stared at it longer than the others. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't acknowledging the shove, or the wall, or the blood. She was upset about optics. That told me everything I needed to know. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that, too. In the Navy, there's a rule about communication during incidents. You don't say more than necessary. You don't speculate. You don't react emotionally. You wait. I set the phone down again and went to the back door, looking out at the small yard I barely had time to use. The fence needed fixing. The grass needed cutting. Ordinary problems, the kind you solve one step at a time. Behind me, the house stayed quiet, solid, unmoved by opinions or expectations. For the first time since the wedding, my breathing evened out. They thought the house was leverage. What they didn't understand was that it was also a line. I sat at the kitchen table longer than I needed to, not because I was stuck, but because something had finally clicked. The wedding hadn't gone off the rails. It had followed a plan. Once I saw that the rest of the week before the ceremony replayed itself with a different tone. Small comments that had sounded careless now felt rehearsed. Casual questions that weren't really questions at all. My mother's call 3 days before the wedding came back to me first. She'd sounded unusually gentle. "We just want everything to be peaceful," she said. "You know how important this day is to Madison." "I know," I replied. "And whatever you're feeling," she continued, "just remember family first." I'd heard that phrase my entire life. It was never about support. It was about compliance. The next night, my father called. He didn't waste time on small talk. "You're staying at the hotel, right?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. We'll all be together. Makes things easier." Easier for who, he didn't say. At the rehearsal dinner, Madison barely looked at me. She was busy being the center of the room, laughing loudly, accepting compliments, correcting people when they didn't get her title right. Bride. Not fiancé. Bride. When she finally did speak to me, it was in passing. "You didn't bring your car, did you?" she asked. "No," I said. "Why?" "Oh, just curious." At the time, it hadn't seemed important. Now it did. They didn't want me leaving easily. I'd also noticed how often the house came up that night. Not directly, indirectly. Little jokes from relatives who didn't know any better. "So this is the sister with the house," one aunt said, laughing. "Smart girl." My father smiled. Madison squeezed my arm a little too tightly. The trap wasn't built on one moment. It was layered. By the morning of the wedding, the messaging had shifted again. My mother knocked on my hotel door while I was getting dressed. "You look tired," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I'm fine." She hesitated, then smoothed a wrinkle in my sleeve like she used to when I was a kid. "If anything comes up today," she said, "just let it go. It's not worth the stress." That was the tell. When people warn you not to react, it's usually because that they're planning to provoke you. I went to the ceremony anyway, sat where I was told, smiled when appropriate, kept my phone on silent. Everything was beautiful, expensive, carefully staged. At the reception, my father took charge early. He'd always been good at that, the confident voice, the easy authority. People listened to him. When he tapped the glass for attention, nobody questioned it. What I hadn't noticed in the moment, but saw clearly later on video, was how many phones were already raised before he spoke. They'd set the scene perfectly. A public announcement, a generous gift. Applause to lock it in. If I stayed quiet, the house was gone. If I protested, I'd be the problem. That was the math. Back at my kitchen table, I replayed it all without emotion. No anger, no shock, just clarity. They'd chosen the wedding because it was the one place I'd been trained not to push back. They'd chosen the audience because shame works better when witnesses are present. And they'd chosen my silence because they thought it was permanent. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. It was my mother. "Are you home?" she asked immediately. "Yes." She exhaled. Good. We need to talk. I'm resting. There was a pause. Then softer. Your father didn't mean for things to get physical. He pushed me into a wall, I said. Well, she replied carefully. Emotions were high. I closed my eyes for a second. This is exactly what I mean, she continued. You're focusing on the wrong part. People are talking. I didn't raise my voice. They should be. Another pause. Then Madison is devastated. She shoved me. She's under a lot of stress. I ended the call. That conversation confirmed what I already knew. They weren't interested in accountability. They wanted control. I stood up and walked through the house again, this time with intention, not checking for comfort, checking for security. I locked the back door, then the front, then the side gate. At the desk in the spare room, I pulled out my laptop and opened a new folder. I scanned the deed, the mortgage statements, property tax receipts, insurance, maintenance invoices, everything with my name on it. Dates, amounts, digital proof. In my line of work, documentation matters. Not because you expect a problem, but because you're prepared for one. I saved everything to an external drive and backed it up to a secure cloud folder. Then I emailed myself a copy with a timestamp. I didn't feel dramatic doing it. I felt calm. Outside, a car slowed down near my house. I looked up instinctively. It kept moving. Still, I checked the camera app on my phone. Nothing unusual. I sat back down and finally read through some of the messages I'd ignored earlier. Most were noise, sympathy, shock, curiosity. One message stood out. A cousin I barely talked to. Did you know they were going to announce that? I typed back, no. The response came quickly. They were talking about it weeks ago. That sealed it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle. Not as betrayal, as information. The difference mattered. My phone buzzed again. Madison this time. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, she wrote. I hope you're happy. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my calendar and blocked off the next 2 days. No visits, no calls, no explanations. In the Navy, when something breaks, you don't argue about whose fault it is while the system is still unstable. You stabilize first. I closed the laptop, stood up, and turned off the lights in the spare room. The house went quiet again. They thought the wedding was the trap. They hadn't realized I'd already stepped out of it. The house stayed quiet that night, but my phone didn't. I set it on the counter and watched it light up every few minutes, like it had a pulse of its own. Messages stacked. Missed calls piled up. I ignored most of them. I wasn't ready to listen to anyone explain what I already understood. What I couldn't ignore was how fast the footage spread. By mid-morning, links started coming in from people I barely knew. Old classmates, a woman I'd worked with years ago, someone from base I'd never spoken to outside of work. Is this you? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The video answered for me. The angle was clear enough to make my stomach tighten every time I saw it. You could see Madison's face change when I said no. You could hear my father's voice drop sharp and warning. You could watch his hand close around my arm, the shove the wall rushing up behind me. There was no dramatic editing, no music, no commentary, just the sound of the impact and the room losing control all at once. That was the part that mattered. Not the shouting, not the screaming, the sound. It didn't sound like a mistake. At the hotel, after the paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher, my father tried to talk to the police like this was something he could manage. He stood straight, hands open, voice calm, the version of him that usually worked. She slipped, he said. It was chaos. People were pushing. The officer didn't argue. He didn't nod either. He just asked for statements and wrote things down. Madison stayed close to my mother, crying quietly, face buried in her shoulder. She never once looked at me directly, not until the stretcher started moving. Our eyes met for half a second. Hers weren't angry or guilty, They were calculating. She was already thinking about what this would look like later. In the ambulance, I tried not to think about how many people had watched it happen live. I focused on answering questions clearly. Name. Date of birth. What happened? My sister pushed me, I said. And your father, the medic asked. He shoved me into the wall. Simple. Accurate. No adjectives. That clarity carried through the hospital intake, through the scans, through the quiet conversation with a police officer who introduced himself and asked if I felt safe going home. I do, I said. Alone. He nodded like he understood why that mattered. By the time I was discharged, the video had passed 1 million views. I knew because someone told me, not because I checked. I didn't need the number. I could feel the shift without it. At home, I replayed the video once more. Not to punish myself, to make sure I remembered it exactly as it happened. The angle from the bar showed something I hadn't noticed in the moment. Phones were already out before my father even finished his announcement. This wasn't just a crowd reacting. It was a crowd ready. People sensed something was coming. There was another clip shorter, zoomed in tighter. It showed Madison's hands clearly. No ambiguity. No accidental bump. That clip spread faster than the rest. By the afternoon, hashtags started appearing. My name. Madison's. Words like assault and wedding in the same sentence. That's when the messages changed tone. At first they'd been curious, shocked. Now they were cautious, measured. A text from my mother came through. Please don't say anything else publicly. We can fix this. Fix this meant contain it. My father left a voicemail. His voice was steadier than I expected. You don't understand how this works, he said. Once things are online, they don't go away. Let me handle it. I deleted it. At base, my command contacted me before I contacted them. That didn't surprise me. The Navy doesn't like surprises, especially public ones. The call was brief, professional. We're aware of the video, my commanding officer said. We're checking in to make sure you're okay. I am, I replied. There will be a review. He continued, standard procedure. I understand. He paused. Take the time you need. We'll follow up. No accusations, no warnings, just process. That alone told me something important. If I'd done anything wrong, the tone would have been different. The review didn't scare me. I'd been reviewed my entire career, performance, conduct, decisions. It was familiar territory. What unsettled me was how quickly my family tried to get ahead of the narrative. Madison's friend posted a photo of her in her dress, with a caption about stress and misunderstandings. My mother commented with hearts. My father stayed silent. It was coordinated. I didn't counter it. I didn't need to. The videos did the talking. That evening, I finally answered one call. A cousin I trusted. They're freaking out, she said without preamble. They didn't think anyone would keep the footage. I know, I said. They're saying you should have known better, that you pushed him. I almost laughed. Almost. Did you watch the video, I asked? Yes, she said. All of it. Then you know. She hesitated. Yeah, I do. After we hung up, I sat in my living room with the lights off, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The pain in my shoulder throbbed dully, manageable. What hurt more was realizing how little had changed in my family's approach. Even with evidence, even with witnesses, even with millions of views, they were still trying to rewrite it. I picked up my phone and turned off notifications completely, not because I was overwhelmed, because I was done reacting. The video had done what my silence never could. It had stopped the argument before it could start. There was nothing left to explain. I woke up before my alarm, the dull ache in my shoulder pulsing in time with my heartbeat, and reached for my phone out of habit, before remembering I'd shut everything off. For a few seconds, the room felt normal. Then the weight of it all settled back in. I turned notifications on again, not because I wanted the noise, but because I needed information. In my world, you don't move blind. You check the data. The screen filled instantly. Missed calls, messages, news alerts. Someone had stitched together multiple angles of the incident into a single clip. Clear audio, clear visuals, no commentary, just facts. 5 million views. The number didn't feel real. It felt like a statistic from a briefing slide. Big, abstract, and dangerous if misunderstood. I showered carefully, keeping my back to the water, and dressed slowly. Civilian clothes, nothing flashy. I made coffee and drank it standing at the counter, staring at the wall like I was waiting for orders. They came sooner than I expected. My commanding officer called mid-morning. Same calm tone as before, same professional distance. "We're initiating a formal review," he said. "Not disciplinary. Administrative." "I understand," I replied. "You're not in trouble," he added. "But this is public and we have to address it." "Yes, sir." He paused. "For what it's worth, I've watched the video. I didn't say anything. There's nothing in it that concerns me about your conduct," he continued. "Still, process is process." That was the Navy in a sentence. After the call, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I pulled up the video again, this time watching it like an investigator would. Frame by frame, body language, sequence. I wasn't looking for justification. I was confirming alignment between what I remembered and what the footage showed. It matched. There was no aggression from me, no escalation, no movement that could be misread as provocation, just refusal. Then impact. That mattered. By noon, the story had jumped from social media to actual news. Local first, then national. Headlines varied, but the core stayed the same. Wedding altercation goes viral. Navy officer assaulted at sister's wedding. Family dispute turns violent on live stream. The military angle changed everything. It introduced a standard people understood. Discipline, accountability, chain of command. It also removed my family's ability to spin it as a private disagreement. My mother tried again around lunchtime. New voicemail, softer voice, slower words. "Please," she said. "They're calling it assault. This is getting out of hand." It had been out of her hands the moment Madison's hands hit my shoulders. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to base. I wasn't required to be there. No one had ordered me in. But I wanted to face it head on. That was how I'd always handled things that mattered. At the gate, the guard checked my ID and nodded like nothing was different. That small normalcy helped more than I expected. Inside, I met with a legal officer and a representative from my command. No accusations, no raised voices, just questions. Did you say no? Yes. Did you initiate physical contact? No. Did you attempt to de-escalate? Yes. I answered clearly, briefly, the way I'd been trained. They had the video pulled up on a monitor. They didn't ask me to watch it. They didn't need to. When the meeting ended, the legal officer closed her folder and looked at me directly. "You're protected," she said, "both legally and professionally." I exhaled for the first time that day. On my way out, someone I barely knew stopped me in the hallway. "Senior enlisted." We'd crossed paths before, never spoken much. "That took guts," he said quietly. I nodded. "I didn't plan it." He shrugged. "Most important things aren't planned." Outside, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Madison's husband. Short, carefully worded. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long moment. Not angry, just tired. The comments online were shifting too. Early on, there'd been arguments, people picking sides, debating family loyalty. Now it was different. Women sharing similar stories. Men admitting they'd seen things like this before. People talking about boundaries, like they were learning a new word. That part surprised me. I hadn't set out to make a statement. I'd just said no. Back home, I checked the locks again. Not out of fear, but out of habit. I pulled the blinds halfway and sat down with my laptop. An email from the Navy legal office confirmed what I'd been told in person. Administrative review underway. No adverse action anticipated. Another email followed this one from a reporter asking for comment. I didn't reply. My father finally broke his silence that evening. He sent a message, not a voicemail. You've made your point. This has gone far enough. I read it twice. He still thought this was about winning. I didn't respond. I didn't block him either. I saved the message and closed the app. The house felt smaller that night. Not because it was threatened, but because the outside world had suddenly pressed in. Cameras, opinions, expectations. I didn't invite it. I couldn't stop it. What I could do was stay steady. I made dinner, ate slowly, cleaned up. The normal motions anchored me. Before bed, I checked the video one last time. The view count had climbed again. Millions of strangers had seen something my family had spent years pretending didn't exist. I turned the phone face down and switched off the light. For the first time since the wedding, I slept without dreaming. The first official document arrived by email just after sunrise, stamped dated and written in language that didn't care about feelings. I read it twice, not because it was confusing, but because it was definitive. The Navy's administrative review acknowledged the incident cited the video evidence and concluded there was no misconduct on my part. It stated that I had acted within my rights, that the altercation was initiated by civilians, and that no adverse action would be taken against me. Clean, final, boring. Exactly what I wanted. I forwarded the email to my personal account, saved a copy, and archived it. In my line of work, documentation isn't about pride. It's about closure. That same morning, a police officer called to follow up. He was polite, direct, and efficient. We've reviewed all available footage, he said. Multiple angles, clear audio. We're proceeding. Proceeding how I asked. With charges, he replied. Assault, at minimum. There was no hesitation in his voice, no need to soften it. I thanked him and ended the call. The system had done what systems are supposed to do when they work. It had stripped the situation of status, emotion, and family hierarchy and reduced it to actions and consequences. My family didn't know how to operate in that environment. My mother called an hour later, frantic. This has gone too far, she said. They're treating this like a crime. It was a crime, I replied. You're being dramatic, she insisted. Your father didn't mean I cut her off. The video shows what he meant. She went quiet, then softer. You could stop this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't start it. She hung up without saying goodbye. By noon, the headlines had changed again. The word alleged started disappearing. Reporters referenced police statements. Legal analysts weighed in. Madison's name was no longer protected by tone. Her social media went dark. Comments were turned off. Photos disappeared. People noticed. Her husband released a brief statement through a lawyer. It expressed concern. It acknowledged the seriousness of the situation. It didn't mention her innocence. That omission said more than any denial could. I didn't take pleasure in it. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt lighter. The pressure that had lived in my chest since the wedding eased, replaced by something steadier. Not relief, alignment. For the first time, the narrative matched reality. In the afternoon, I met with a legal advisor recommended by BASE, not because I planned to sue anyone, but because I wanted to understand my position. She listened, took notes, and nodded. You have strong protection here, she said. Between the footage, the police report, and the Navy's findings, there's very little room for reinterpretation. What about my family contacting me? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Document everything. Save messages. Don't engage emotionally. That advice mirrored my own instincts. When I got home, I created a folder on my computer and labeled it simply Records. I saved the police email, the Navy memo, screenshots of messages from my parents and Madison, dates, times, no commentary. This wasn't revenge. It was preparation. In the early evening, my father showed up at my house. I saw his car on the camera feed before he knocked. He stood on the porch like he owned it, hands in his pockets posture, confident. I didn't open the door. He knocked again, harder this time. "Avery," he called. "We need to talk." I spoke through the door. "You should leave." "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're hiding in there like I'm some kind of threat." "You assaulted me," I said. Calm, clear. There was a pause. Then his tone changed. "You don't understand how much damage you're doing," he said. "To the family, to yourself. I understand exactly what I'm doing." He tried once more. "Open the door." "No." He stood there longer than I expected, then left without another word. The camera showed him walking back to his car, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked small. Madison texted that night. "No insults, no accusations. Can we talk privately?" I read it, then put the phone down. I didn't owe her privacy. She'd taken this public the moment she put her hands on me in a room full of witnesses. I went for a short walk around the neighborhood instead. The air was cool, the street quiet. Ordinary. No one stared, no one whispered. Life continued. That mattered. Back inside, I cooked dinner and ate at the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Normal noises. Safe noises. The power had shifted not because I'd fought harder, but because I'd stopped absorbing the impact for them. They'd relied on my silence, on my instinct to smooth things over, to make space. Once that stopped, everything else followed naturally. Before bed, I checked my phone one last time. Another message from my mother sat unread. I didn't open it. I turned off the light and lay down, shoulders still sore but manageable. The house held steady around me, and for the first time since I bought it, it felt like more than a place to sleep. It felt like a boundary that finally held. The first thing to collapse wasn't public. It was internal. I noticed it in the way that the messages changed. Fewer explanations, less confidence. The tone shifted from control to panic without anyone admitting it. My mother's text started arriving earlier in the morning, longer, more scattered. She stopped telling me what to do and started asking what I wanted. "What will make this stop?" one message read. I didn't answer. My father tried a different approach. He sent a single email subject line blank. It was written like a memo. Short paragraphs, careful phrasing. He talked about reputation, about stress, about how families survive hard moments by sticking together. He mentioned forgiveness without apologizing. He framed my silence as stubbornness. He never mentioned the wall. Madison didn't write for 2 days. When she finally did, it wasn't anger. It was something else. "I didn't think he'd lose control like that," she said. Not "I'm sorry," not "I hurt you," just surprised that the system hadn't protected her. By then, the online conversation had moved on from speculation to consequences. Screenshots from the wedding circulated alongside still frames from the video. People analyzed body language like they were watching game film. Madison's image fractured. Sponsors she'd quietly worked with stopped tagging her. Friends went private. Comments disappeared. Her husband stopped appearing in photos altogether. I didn't track it closely. I didn't need to. The pressure showed up where it mattered. A mutual acquaintance reached out and told me my father had been asked to step down from a board position. Another mentioned that my parents had canceled a fundraiser they hosted every year. The structure that had always cushioned them was failing. That was the thing they hadn't planned for. They thought this would stay inside the family. They thought, worst case, it would be a brief scandal, something to smooth over with the right conversations. They underestimated how little patience systems have for ambiguity once evidence exists. At home, the phone rang again. I answered this time not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to end something cleanly. It was my mother. "I don't recognize you," she said, voice shaking. "You're being so cold." "I'm being clear," I replied. "You're tearing us apart." I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I just said, "I'm not coming over anymore." Silence. What do you mean? She asked. I mean, I'm done engaging, I said. I won't be visiting. I won't be discussing this. And I won't be available. You can't just cut off your family. I can, I said. And I am. She cried then, loud, uncontrolled. The sound carried through the phone in a way it never had before. I waited. When it slowed, I spoke again. If you contact me again about this, I said I'll document it and forward it to my attorney. That stopped her. We hung up without a goodbye. Madison tried once more the next day. She showed up at my house unannounced. I saw her on the camera feed standing stiffly on the porch, sunglasses on, phone in hand. I didn't open the door. She knocked twice, then called my phone. I let it ring. After a minute, she sent a text. This isn't how it's supposed to end. I typed back one sentence. It didn't start the way it was supposed to either. She stood there for a few more seconds, then walked away. The moment passed without drama. No shouting, no confrontation, just distance settling into place. That evening, I packed a box. Not of essentials, of reminders, old photos, holiday cards. Small things I'd kept out of habit, not attachment. I didn't destroy them. I didn't make a speech to myself. I taped the box shut and put it in the garage. At work, things stabilized quickly. The Navy moved on. Reviews concluded. My schedule returned to normal. Colleagues didn't pry. A few offered quiet support. Others acted like nothing had happened. I preferred the latter. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted normalcy. The house felt different once the decision was made. Not emptier, lighter. The constant low-level tension, wondering when the next call would come, what I'd have to defend, was gone. I started sleeping through the night again. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped me while I was checking the mail. Rough few weeks, she said gently. Yeah, I replied. She nodded toward my house. You okay? Here I am, I said and meant it. That night I cooked a simple dinner and ate it at the table instead of the counter. No phone, no news, just quiet. For years I'd stayed connected out of obligation. I'd absorbed things I didn't agree with because it seemed easier than setting limits. What I realized now was that ease had been expensive. Walking away wasn't dramatic. It wasn't revenge. It was maintenance. You don't keep a structure standing by ignoring cracks. You reinforce, or you leave. I chose to leave. The final message came late. A group text I hadn't been part of before. Extended family. A long paragraph about healing and time and misunderstandings. I read it once, then muted the thread. I wasn't angry reading it. I wasn't sad. I felt resolved. When I turned off the lights and went upstairs, the house was quiet in the way I'd always hoped it would be. Not tense, not waiting, just steady. The first morning that felt normal again didn't arrive with relief. It arrived with routine. I woke before my alarm rolled carefully onto my side and tested my shoulder. Sore but workable. I stood stretched and made coffee the same way I always had. The house was quiet, not tense, just quiet. I put on my uniform and checked myself in the mirror by the door. Nothing dramatic. No visible bruises. Just me standing where I belonged. Driving to base traffic moved the way it always did. People merged too late. Someone honked without reason. Ordinary problems. The kind that don't ask you to choose sides. At work, nobody treated me like a headline. My name was on the schedule. My tasks were the same as before. A briefing to prepare. A timeline to verify. A shipment to reroute. That steadiness mattered. Later that week, I met with my commanding officer in person. He closed the door, sat across from me, and spoke plainly. This is behind us, he said. Your performance hasn't changed. If anything, you handled it professionally. Thank you, sir. He nodded. Get back to work. That was it. No ceremony, no cautionary speech. I walked out feeling lighter than I had in months. At home, the mailbox finally stopped overflowing. The calls slowed to a trickle. When my phone buzzed now, it was friends. coworkers. Normal life asserting itself again. I didn't block my family's numbers. I didn't need to. Silence held without effort. One afternoon, I took a long walk through the neighborhood. The same route I'd taken 100 times before, past the same houses, the same uneven sidewalk slabs. I noticed things I hadn't before. A new mailbox. Fresh paint on a porch. Change without announcement. Back at my house, I unlocked the door and stood in the entryway for a moment, letting the familiar settle in. The place still looked the same. Couch where it always was. Photos on the shelf I hadn't touched in weeks. The difference wasn't the house. It was me. I spent that evening doing small, ordinary tasks. Laundry, dishes, replacing a light bulb in the hallway. Work that needed doing without commentary or witnesses. For years, I'd lived as if my life required approval to count. I'd built everything carefully, quietly, assuming that if I just stayed reasonable, things would resolve themselves. They hadn't. What changed wasn't my personality. It was my tolerance. I didn't wake up angry anymore. I didn't brace myself before checking my phone. I didn't rehearse explanations I no longer intended to give. That absence felt like peace. A week later, I received a short email from a legal office confirming that the case had moved forward. Dates, procedures, neutral language. I saved it, filed it, and closed the folder. This wasn't something I needed to revisit emotionally. It was something that existed, documented, handled. Madison didn't reach out again. Neither did my father. My mother sent one final message, longer than the rest, carefully written, full of words like regret and distance and time. I read it once and archived it. I wasn't waiting for understanding. I was finished negotiating. On a Saturday morning, I worked in the yard for the first time in months. Trimmed the hedge, cleared leaves, fixed a loose fence board. The sun was warm, the air steady. A neighbor waved. I waved back. It struck me then how much effort I'd spent managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own. How easily I'd accepted roles that limited me because they kept things smooth. Smooth isn't the same as stable. Stability takes structure, boundaries, maintenance. Inside, I made lunch and ate at the table by the window. No rush, no noise. Just time passing the way it's supposed to. Later that afternoon, I took out a small folder I'd kept since buying the house. The original deed. A receipt from the day I closed. The pen I'd used to sign my name. I didn't frame them. I didn't make a display. I just put them back where they belonged. This house wasn't a trophy. It was a foundation. That night I sat on the couch with the lights low, not watching anything in particular, letting the day end on its own terms. I thought about the wedding, the wall, the sound, the way everything had cracked open in one moment, and I thought about what came after. I hadn't won anything. I hadn't taken anything from anyone. I'd kept what was mine. My work, my home, my voice. I turned off the lamp and headed upstairs, the house settling around me the way it always did, solid and familiar. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing waiting for me to fix, explain, or endure. Just tomorrow arriving like it always does. If this family revenge story and military journey resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more real-life family drama stories where quiet strength changes everything. 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 Everything.